this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the May My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I love to use strips of paper on my layouts. I had an idea for using slightly larger strips than I usually use for quite a long time, so I decided that this was the day that I was going to try out this composition. I cut out a whole bunch of strips of paper. These measure 3/4 of an inch wide and they're various lengths. I'm using a lot of scraps and pieces of pattern paper that I had already cut into. Then I inked the edges of all of these pattern papers with some Distress Oxide. I used fossilized amber on the yellow pattern paper, broken china on the blue pattern paper, Victorian velvet on the pink one, and shaded lilac on that really pretty purple paper with the butterflies. For the background, I use a piece of blue cardstock from my stash. For the square that I have turned on its side in the center of the page, I used an 80-pound piece of white cardstock and I cut it into a 7-inch square. And now I'm going to place those strips of paper around that square. I start off with one strip of paper of each of the 4 patterns and colors, and I use some ATG adhesive and I'm attaching those down to the paper. I'm going to continue attaching the strips of paper down. I'm going to use the same order for the strips of paper on all 4 sides of the square. The order is yellow, purple, blue, pink. So if I start off with a purple strip, I will put the blue strip, then the pink strip, then the yellow strip next. And the reason that I follow this pattern is so that all of the colors are distributed evenly around the page. After I had those first strips attached down, I selected another strip of paper in the order of the pattern that I had chosen. And all of the hard work is done for me at this point. I have the square in the center of the page. I have the strips of paper cut to size. It's just a matter of now placing them on the page in the order that I want them, and then I'm going to use the ATG adhesive and attach all of them down to the page. Although I switched up the placement of the strips of paper on the page and the center area of the layout, I got the general idea for this type of a layout a really long time ago at a scrapbook convention. And then recently I saw a similar card and I thought this is a really cute idea. I wanted to try it out on a big scale. And I think that it really helps to showcase how beautiful those pattern papers are. It also gives me a nice area in the center where I can put my photo and a number of embellishments. When I got to this point in the layout, I stopped and I trimmed off all of the excess strips of paper. I knew that the pieces of paper that I cut off would be able to be used on the remainder of the layout. I roughly trimmed the strips of paper shorter, and then I use my trimmer to make a nice clean line along the edge of the layout. For the cleanest line using the trimmer, I always find that it's best to not cut the strips of paper too short and too close to where I want them to be. I leave a little bit of extra paper, and then the trimmer somehow works better than if I try to cut them too close. I guess it doesn't really have enough paper to grab onto. Now, using those strips of paper that I trimmed off all of the edges, I'm able to complete the pattern on the remaining part of the layout. I was very happy that when I got to the edge of the paper on all 4 corners, that the strips of paper came down to the same spot on all 4 of the corners. There were no gaps, there were no overlaps. It just worked out really well on this particular layout. I wanted to layer some border strips in the center of the layout, so I thought it would be easier if I just cut another piece of white paper to work on separately, since I already had the other piece of white paper attached down to the layout. I used a border punch that I had in my stash and I cut out a whole bunch of border strips using some 80-pound cardstock. I want to put these borders in a frame all around the outside of this square. And in order to make that look as nice as possible, I cut some 45-degree angles in the corners, and I was able to do that by lining my ruler up with 2 opposite corners while I had the border strip positioned going along one of the edges. I trimmed along those pencil lines, and then I was able to create that frame. I'm going to layer the border strips on each other 3 times so that I have a nice full frame going around the outside of the square. I'm using white because the background is already very busy with all those strips of paper, so I thought that it would be nice to add some texture and some pattern to the background, but not add a whole lot of color in the center. I also know I'm going to be adding some embellishments to the center, so that's another reason why I wanted to keep this plain, but not totally plain. I always like to add something to make it a little more interesting. Despite all the measuring, the corners don't turn out perfectly. I knew that they wouldn't be absolutely perfect, so I had already planned on putting some pearls on the corners. The pearls aren't that large, but they are wide enough to just cover up any imperfections or places where the border strips didn't quite line up. This would be a lot easier if these were just solid, straight strips of paper, but because there's a pattern, sometimes when the two edges come together, it doesn't look that great. But that's okay because they're going to be covered up, as I said. I continued this process until I had 3 layers of those border strips. I wanted to cover up the inside edge of the border strips and also add a little bit of color to the center. I cut another white square that was 5.5 inches, and then I cut a piece of the purple pattern paper to just very slightly wider than that. I put some adhesive on the back of the purple paper, and then I was going to layer it on the white paper till I realized I wanted to do the opposite. So I went ahead and I put the purple paper on the square, and then I'm going to put the white paper on top of it. I measured just to make sure that I had that square on there straight, and then I layered the white square on top of the purple square. The butterflies are kind of sideways on the square because of course I'm going to be turning it onto its side, but it doesn't matter because you only see a little hint of the purple paper behind the white square. Now I'm applying those pearls that I spoke of earlier. I am putting 4 in each corner, and my goal here is to make those lines of pearls as straight as possible. I think that this really worked for covering up any of the little imperfections, and I think that it gave kind of a finished look to that area of the layout. I buy the self-adhesive pearls from a number of different manufacturers and number of different sources, but I use a lot of the Eyelet and Brad outlet jewels. That's what I was using on this layout. I use those quite a bit. I think that they have a very reasonable price for their self-adhesive pearls. Now that that center square is finally complete, I attach it down to the layout. I'm beginning my work on the center area of the layout where I'm going to have my photo and a number of embellishments. I have my photo mounted on some white cardstock, and then I'm mounting that on top of some of the yellow pattern paper, and then I'm attaching that down to the center of the layout. I'm going to go with a very symmetrical layout here. I use my T-square just to make sure that it is actually right in the center. I think that this is the time to make any adjustments instead of waiting until I have embellishments on top of it and then realizing that it's a little crooked or a little off center, which has happened to me before. You may know that I love to add photo corners to my layouts. I use an EK Success scalloped photo corner punch on this layout. I have 2 other photo corner punches by EK Success. One is very similar, just doesn't have a scalloped edge, and the other one has a little point in the center. And I use the scalloped photo corner punch a lot, and I also use the plain one, and I just love the way you can punch out coordinating photo corners. I used to hunt far and wide for different color photo corners. It's so much easier now to use the punch. And I inked the edges of all of those photo corners before I put them down on the layout. Now I'm starting to work on some other embellishments. I have my title, which says, "You are some kind of wonderful." And then I have a number of the Prima flowers that I have arranged in 2 opposite corners. I love banners. There was a floral banner in the ephemera pack, so I put one of those underneath the photo. Then I took a number of die cuts into both of the clusters. There are some die cut leaves, flowers, branches. I put the same number of embellishments in each of the clusters, not necessarily in the exact same place, just enough so that they would both be balanced. My title, which is not symmetrical actually, is going to go to the left of the photo, and I'm going to pop it up on some foam. So I put some heavy cardstock behind it to help reinforce it. Now I'm attaching those die cut pieces down with the ATG adhesive, and that way I know that if I change my mind about the placement, I can always move them around before the layout is complete. Or sometimes after the layout is complete, if you're me and you tend to go back to layouts and move things around. Although I usually only move things around if it's within a couple of days after I finish the layout, just because I've moved on to new projects. But I have been known to go back to older layouts if something is really bothering me. I added some foam to the back of the title. I attached that down to the page. And there was a really pretty butterfly that I'm putting on the right-hand side of the layout. I only am including one butterfly on this layout. This kind of balances the title. I love the way it has a lot of that holographic foiling on it, as do a lot of the pattern papers. I use heavy gel medium to attach the flowers down to the layout. I think this is the perfect adhesive for that. Unlike the ATG adhesive, this is a permanent adhesive. You have a little bit of time to move things around before it dries, but once the gel medium does dry, the items that you've attached down to the page are not going to come up, so you really have to commit to whatever decisions you've made once you have the gel medium on your page. I love to add these branches to my layouts. I think I've added them on every one of my layouts this month. These are die cuts from a die made by Sentimentally Yours. This is called Berry Branches. I really love adding touches of these die cuts to floral clusters. I think that the fact that they're very delicate makes the pages more interesting. And then I also like the idea of adding white into colorful clusters. I added some small pearls to the centers of the flowers on the banner. I'm sorry, this part is blurry, but it clears up by the end. I removed a bow I had on the bottom. I just thought it was too close to the bottom of the layout. And now I'm adding some Finnabair heavy white gesso to the edges of the petals on those really pretty flowers. I think it adds just a really nice, pretty touch and adds another little bit of dimension to the flowers. I put some more adhesive on the back of the title. This layout is complete. Here are some close-ups. I should mention that after I finished filming this video, I added a chipboard bird and a pink bow from my stash to the top of the layout. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please take a look in the description box. You'll find a link to the My Creative Scrapbook website. You could check out all of the beautiful monthly kits that they have there, and you can get a subscription if you're interested. Please feel free to leave a comment. I love reading all of your comments. I hope everybody has a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.